Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. In today's video, we're going to discuss Samson, one of the judges appointed by God to champion the Israelites. He's a man characterized by prodigious strength and ungovernable impulsivity, a man who could fairly be dubbed the biblical Hercules. We'll begin by going over who exactly the judges were and who the Philistines were, and then with that covered, we'll spend the rest of the video going over Samson's story in its entirety. Alright, let's get into it. The judges are a series of leaders who guided and governed the Israelites before the establishment of the monarchy. Their stories are primarily recounted in the book of Judges, which is the 7th book of the Old Testament. The judges were not judges in the modern sense of the word. They were more like tribal leaders, military commanders, and deliverers chosen by God to rescue the Israelites from their enemies and to govern the people during times of crisis. The judges were seen as instruments of God's will, and their authority was believed to be divinely ordained. The period of the judges lasted several centuries, from the time of Joshua's death until the rise of the monarchy with the anointing of King Saul. According to the book of Judges, the Israelites would often fall into a cycle of disobedience and idolatry, prompting God to allow their enemies to oppress them. Then, when the Israelites cried out to God for help, He would raise up a judge to deliver them from their enemies, restoring peace and order for a time. However, once the judge died, the Israelites would often fall back into disobedience, and the cycle would repeat. The Philistines were an ancient people who lived in the southern coastal region of Canaan, along the eastern Mediterranean coast, in what is now modern-day Israel and the Gaza Strip. Their territory, known as Philistia, comprised 5 main city-states: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. The Philistines emerged as a distinct culture around the 12th century BC and persisted until the Babylonian conquest in the 6th century BC. The Philistines are frequently mentioned in the Old Testament, where they are depicted as adversaries of the Israelites. They played a significant role during the time of the Judges and the early Israelite monarchy. Some of the most famous biblical stories involving the Philistines include the accounts of Samson, the Ark of the Covenant's capture, and David's defeat of the Philistine champion Goliath. The story of Samson, a Nazirite and a judge of Israel, is found in the book of Judges, chapters 13 to 16. Samson is known for his incredible strength and his violently tumultuous relationship with the Philistines. A quick word on Nazirites before we continue. A Nazirite is a person who takes a special vow of dedication to God, as described in the book of Numbers. The Nazirite vow involves 3 main prohibitions: abstaining from alcohol and grape products, not cutting one's hair, and avoiding contact with dead bodies. Both men and women could take the vow for a specific period or a lifetime. At the end of the vow, newly raised Nazirites performed rituals, which included offering sacrifices and shaving their heads. Samson and Samuel are well-known biblical examples of Nazirites, both of whom were dedicated to God from birth. Samson's birth was prophesied by an angel who appeared to his mother, a barren woman from the tribe of Dan. The angel told her that she would conceive a son, and that he would be a Nazirite from birth, consecrated to God, and so forbidden to drink wine or cut his hair. The angel also prognosticated that Samson would begin to deliver Israel from the oppressive rule of the Philistines. As he grew up, Samson received blessings from the Lord, the spirit of the divine stirring within him. And over time, Samson's remarkable strength began to manifest itself, dwarfing that of other men. One day, while visiting the Philistine town of Timnah, Samson saw a Philistine woman and decided to marry her, despite his parents' objections. On his way to ask for her hand in marriage, Samson encountered a lion, which he tore apart with his bare hands. Later, when Samson returned to Timnah for his wedding, he discovered that bees had made honey in the carcass of the lion he had previously killed. This unusual event inspired him to pose a riddle at the wedding feast. Samson challenged the Philistine guests to solve the riddle within 7 days. offering them a reward if they succeeded. A wager of 30 garments of clothing was made. If the riddle remained unanswered, Samson would collect, and if the riddle was answered correctly, then Samson would have to provide the 30 garments as compensation. Alluding to the lion and the bees, the riddle reads as follows: "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." Unable to solve the riddle, the Philistines threatened Samson's wife, forcing her to coax her husband and ascertain the answer from him. She succeeded, and the Philistines were subsequently able to give the correct answer to Samson's riddle. Furious, Samson traveled to Ashkelon, killed 30 Philistines, and took their garments to pay off his wager. In his anger, he left his wife, who was given to one of his companions. Samson intended to eventually reconcile with his wife, but, to his dismay, he discovered that she had been given to another man. In retaliation, he caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, and fastened torches between them. He then released the foxes into the Philistine fields, destroying their crops. The Philistines, who of course weren't inclined to allow this retributive destruction to go unpunished, burned alive Samson's wife and her father, further fueling Samson's rage. Empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, Samson fiercely fought against the Philistines, defeating many of them, later finding refuge in the cave of Etam. In retaliation for Samson's actions, the Philistines invaded the territory of Judah and demanded that the Israelites hand him over. Out of fear, the men of Judah agreed to apprehend Samson and deliver him to their adversaries. They located Samson in the cave of Etam and persuaded him to surrender peacefully, securing him with 2 new ropes. The men of Judah chose new ropes to bind Samson because they believed that new unweathered ropes would be stronger and less likely to break. They wanted to ensure that Samson would be securely bound when they handed him over to the Philistines, minimizing the chance of his escape. Samson broke free of his bonds. He then grabbed a fresh jawbone of a donkey and used it as a weapon to kill 1,000 Philistine soldiers. After this great victory, Samson was thirsty and cried out to the Lord, who provided water for him from a hollow in the ground. Samson served as a judge of Israel for 20 years, during which he continued to confront the Philistines. On one occasion, he visited the Philistine city of Gaza, where he encountered a prostitute and decided to spend the night with her. Unbeknownst to him, word of his presence in the city quickly spread among the Philistines, who saw this as an opportunity to capture their enemy. The Philistines stealthily positioned themselves near the city gates, intending to ambush Samson when he left in the morning. However, Samson, sensing their plan, decided to leave the city at midnight instead. As he approached the gates, he mustered his immense strength and tore the heavy gates from their hinges. Lifting the massive gates on his shoulders, Samson carried them up a hill and away from the city, thwarting the Philistines' carefully laid ambush and leaving them in awe of his incredible power. Samson fell in love with a Philistine woman named Delilah. When the Philistines learnt of this, they approached Delilah, offering her a rich reward if she could discover the secret of Samson's strength and assist in his capture. Delilah agreed and began questioning Samson about the source of his power, treacherously probing and prying so that she could uncover his secret and relay it. Initially, Samson misled Delilah by telling her false sources of his strength. He told her that if he were bound with fresh bowstrings, he would become as weak as any other man. Delilah tested this by binding Samson with bowstrings while he slept and then calling the Philistines to attack him. The attack was easily foiled as Samson effortlessly broke the bowstrings and defeated the attackers. Undeterred by her first failure, Delilah pressed Samson further. In response, he misled her again, asserting that if he were tied up with new ropes, he would be sapped of his indomitable strength. Though she heeded his words, binding him as described, Samson easily broke free and killed the Philistines when they attacked a second time. Samson then deceived Delilah a third time by telling her that he would lose his strength if the 7 braids of his hair were woven into a loom. Delilah wove his hair into a loom and called the Philistines, but Samson once again proved too formidable to be subdued by the attackers, killing them instead of being taken prisoner. Finally, after being bothered by Delilah to no end, Samson became so vexed that he revealed the true source of his strength, his uncut hair, a symbol of his Nazirite vow. Delilah waited until Samson was asleep, and then she had a man shave off his hair. As his uncut hair symbolized his covenant with God, its removal resulted in the loss of his divine gift. With his hair gone and his connection to God severed, Samson's strength left him, and he was captured by the Philistines. The Philistines gouged out Samson's eyes and brought him to Gaza. They imprisoned him and subjected him to the humiliating toil of grinding grain. During this time, his hair began to grow back, and as Samson's hair grew longer, he gradually regained the power that had been lost when it was cut. The Philistines organized a grand celebration in their temple to honor their god Dagon, whom they believed had delivered Samson into their hands. They decided to bring Samson out of his prison cell to serve as entertainment for the gathered crowd, thinking to humiliate him further by parading him around like an exotic animal. As Samson was led into the temple, he asked a young servant to guide him to the pillars that supported the massive structure. Samson prayed to the Lord one final time, asking for the strength to avenge the cruel treatment he had endured at the hands of his enemies. With his hair now grown back and his connection with God restored, Samson's superhuman strength flooded back into him. Samson positioned himself between the two central pillars of the temple and pushed against them with all his strength. As the pillars gave way, the entire temple came crashing down. Samson sacrificed himself, and his sacrifice was not in vain, for when the temple was brought down, every Philistine inside was killed. In this final act of heroism, Samson killed more Philistines in his death than he had throughout his entire life. And that's it for this video. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.